now these men say that their aim is to go to Juba, the capital of South Sudan, and overthrow the president, Salva Kiir, who they accuse of mass atrocities against their people, the Nuer, the ethnic Nuers, women, children, and they say that they will not stop until they get to the capital and they overthrow Salva Kiir and they install Riek Machar, the former vice president, a Nuer, as the president of this country.
Introducing the speakers for today's debate on whether Salva Kiir of South Sudan should be blamed for the South Sudan conflict. Speaking for the motion, Oluwanifemi Eniola, and arguing against the motion, Paul Kafo Lahai. Stay tuned for an insightful discussion.
The conflict in South Sudan has been ongoing since the country gained independence from Sudan in 2011. The South Sudanese Civil War was a multi-sided war in South Sudan from December 15, 2013 to 2020. The Civil War caused rampant human rights abuses, including forced displacement, ethnic massacres, and killings of journalists by various parties. The Civil War began as a power struggle between President Salva Kiir and his former deputy Riek Machar that quickly escalated into a full-blown civil war involving various ethnic groups and militias. My name is Oluwanifemi Eniola. I stand before you today to argue in favor of President Salva Kiir's government in the South Sudan conflict. While the conflict has been marred by violence and human rights abuses on both sides, I firmly believe that President Kiir's government has been unfairly maligned and that their efforts to maintain stability and security in the country has been justified. President Kiir's government is the democratically elected government of South Sudan, recognized by the international community. As such, they have a legitimate right to maintain law and order within their borders. The opposition forces, led by Riek Machar, are sought to undermine this legitimacy through violent means, which is unacceptable. The government's actions, though sometimes heavy-handed, has been necessary to maintain national security in the face of armed rebellion. The opposition forces have been responsible for numerous attacks on civilian and military targets, which have threatened the very fabric of the state. President Kiir's government has had to take measures to protect its citizens and maintain order. Despite the challenges posed by the conflict, President Kiir's government has made efforts to develop the country's economy, particularly in the oil sector. The government has invested in infrastructure development, such as roads and bridges, which have improved connectivity and facilitated trade. The opposition forces, on the other hand, have sought to disrupt these efforts through violence and sabotage. My opponents may argue that President Kiir's government have been responsible for human rights abuses and war crime. While these allegations are serious and must be investigated, it is essential to recognize that both sides have committed atrocities. Furthermore, the government has taken steps to investigate and prosecute those responsible for human rights abuse. I firmly believe that President Salva Kiir's government has been justified in its efforts to maintain stability and security in South Sudan. While the conflict has been devastating, it is essential to recognize the legitimacy and sovereignty of the government, as well as its efforts to develop the country's economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful, brilliant presentation. I appreciate it a lot. But I beg to differ from your argument. I go against the government of President Salva Kiir, who I believe has played a central role in the devastation of South Sudan since the outbreak of the civil war in December 2013. While you argue that the Kiir's government ensure national security and economic development, I will prove to you evidences that suggest that his government has been responsible for human rights abuses, political repressions, economic mismanagement, and perpetrated ethnic violence. So supporting such government undermines the prospect of peace and justice in South Sudan. President Kiir government has been implicated in gross human rights violations, including mass killing, sexual violence, forced displacement, and attacks on journalists and humanitarian workers. According to the Human Rights Watch 2023 and Amnesty International 2022, South Sudan government forces and allied militia have been responsible for atrocities against civilians, particularly those from the Nuer ethnic group. Let me break this down. The Nuer ethnic groups are the opposition who are in favor of Riek Machar, the former vice president who was sacked by his president Salva Kiir. And Salva Kiir is popularly supported by the Dinka ethnic group. So this division was sort of a clash between the Dinka and the Noah ethnic group. Salva Kiir government have been responsible for atrocities against these civilians. The United Nations Mission on Human Rights in South Sudan 2022 also documented war crimes and crime against humanity committed by Kiir's forces, including extrajudicial execution and enforced disappearances. Supporting a government that engage in such acts contradict international human rights principles. Also, let me tell you how this government have engaged in political repression and lack of democratic legitimacy. So, the Kiir administration has systematically dismantled democratic institutions and silent opposition voices. Report by the International Crisis Group 2023 and the Freedom House Report 2022 highlight arbitrary arrest, torture, and suppression of press freedom. His government has prevented legitimate opposition, including figures like Riek Machar, from participating in meaningful political dialogue. So a government that rules through fear and repression cannot be considered legitimate. Supporting Kiir administration only strengthens authoritarian rule at the expense of democracy and political stability. This government has also been figured for economic mismanagement and corruption. Despite South Sudan's vast oil wealth, Kiir's government has failed to develop the economy, instead engaging in rampant corruption and miscalculation of resources. The Sanitary 2021, an investigative group tracking corruption in Africa, found that top government officials, including Kiir himself, have siphoned millions of dollars from oil revenues, while ordinary South Sudan's needs suffer from extreme poverty and famine. Also, the World Bank 2023 reported that over 70% of South Sudan population live in extreme poverty, with food insecurity worsening due to the government's failure to prioritize economic reform. Infrastructure development, often cited as justification for supporting Kiir, has been minimal, with most projects benefiting elite rather than the general population. Also, supporting a government that mismanages public resources and enable corruption does not promote economic stability or development. Kiir's leadership has exacerbated ethnic tension in South Sudan. The government has used ethnic militias such as the Mantiang Iron to carry out violent campaign against political opponents and rival ethnic groups, particularly in the Nuer and Shilluk communities. The United Nations panel of experts on South Sudan 2022 found that Kiir's forces deliberately fuel ethnic conflict to maintain power, leading to large-scale displacement and deepening division in the country. By supporting Kiir, one is effectively endorsing a government that thrives on ethnic polarizations and mass violence rather than one that fosters reconciliation and national unity. Stating all of these points, I will want to reinstate that I don't support the government of Salva Kiir, which I believe this point will convince every one of you that Salva Kiir cannot be supported on the grounds of national security, legitimacy, or economic development. Instead, he has been responsible for severe human rights abuses, authoritarian governance, economic decline, and ethnic division. The international community and South Sudanese citizens should advocate for a political transition that prioritizes justice, democracy, and sustainable peace. Let's wait and see if the 2026 elections will hold in South Sudan, and possibly Salva Kiir government will be voted out. Oh, who knows? Thank you very much for your audience. My name is Paul Kafolahai, a student of International Relations, PhD.